Hey, how's it going? Hope 2021 is off to a decent start for you. In this tutorial, we're going to go over how to convert a class-based component into a functional component that uses hooks. So this is another common interview topic, and potentially an interview like little mini project as well. So just walking through some of the common differences between class components and functional components using hooks, and some key talking points to bring up while you're going through it. So first thing is when you're using hooks, they've been out for as of this recording, about a year. So they came out in February of 2019. So you want to make sure that you're on React 16.8 or higher. So this is on above 17, so we're good. And that's a good topic to bring up with your interviewer as well. So with this one, it's a super simple little setup. We're just making a call to this SpaceX API endpoint, and then it just renders a list of these different launch names that have taken place. So if you are following along and want to either watch this and then try it yourself or follow along step by step, I've got a repo up. The link is in the description, and you can just clone the repo locally and follow along, or you can just watch and then try it on your own afterward. And I would recommend doing that just so the practices kind of get ingrained in your mind. So just walking through this, we've got our state object that has loading initially set to false and launches initially set to an empty array. We have our component did mount, where we're setting the loading state to true. We're then fetching this list of launches. And obviously this is a pretty minimal setup here. We're not doing any like error handling or anything like that. But again, just to kind of walk through how we would switch from classes to hooks. If we're loading, we're just loading this, or we're displaying this loading text. Otherwise, we are rendering our launch list component, and that just takes in the array of launches from our state object. And then we have an on our list that has each list item as the mission name. So just to look through that, if you refresh it, loading, and then it loads the list. So we don't actually have to do anything with launch list here. We're just going to be working in app.js. So the first thing at the top, and we can do some cleanup a little bit later, we're going to have two things. So knowing that we have some state and knowing that we're running this component did mount, we are going to import use state and use effect. So let's first start by going ahead at the top and creating our functional component. So if you were to save this, you'd get like a duplicate declaration error because you have app declared here and here. But I just like to do it this way, where I kind of make the two in one file and then delete as I go. So we know we are going to need a loading state and then an updater we'll call set loading. And we can set our initial state to false. We are also going to need our launches state. So we'll do launches and set launches. And we'll use the same piece of state where it'll be an empty array initially. So I can now get rid of this. Next, we want to handle our component did mount. So when you're using hooks, although there are some differences, for the most part, you can think of the use effect hook as a way of kind of combining or consolidating the component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount. So you can run your like initial sort of side effects when the component is ready, if any updates take place, and then if you're running any cleanup, you can take care of all of that in your use effect hook. So since we just have a component did mount, we'll go ahead and start writing our use effect hook. And then I'm just going to copy all of this and then make some tweaks. So I'm pasting it in. So we no longer have this dot set state. Instead, we are going to have our set loading updater take care of this. So let's go ahead and do set loading to true. And now we can clean that up. Our fetch can stay the same. Pretty typical, converting our response into JSON, and then from there taking our data and setting it to our state, which now we need to update this. So we can go ahead and do set launches equal to our data. And so that takes care of this piece here. And then also we want to set loading back to false. So set loading to false now that it's done. So now let's get rid of this dot set state and give it a save. Looks like we're getting an error here. Oh, so okay, so syntax error there, just needed to put the curly braces. And now I can run my set launches and set loading. Now the last piece here is, since this is a component did mount, we want to make sure that we have our dependency array. So at the very end here, we want to put an empty array. So when you have an empty array, that means that essentially when the component mounts, you're going to run everything in here, and then that's the only time that it's going to run. Something to mention during your interview, you could say something along the lines of, you know, if there are any updates that need to be made, this is where you would put any variables or any piece of state or any sort of anything that you want to watch would then update based on whatever is in this array. So there's not a great example here because there was no component did update, but this is where you would watch any sort of variables that you're keeping an eye on for a component did update. But since we have component did mount, we can leave this as an empty array. It'll update once the component mounts, and then that's it. Okay, so next, in functional components, we don't need the render method. We just need our return. So let's go ahead and grab this return. And so underneath use effect, I can paste my return. And now down here, this class component doesn't really have anything anymore, so we can delete it. And so now we're no longer referencing this .state.loading. We're just referencing the variable loading, so we can get rid of this .state. And then for our launch list, we're passing down launches as a prop into our launch list. It takes in launches. So similar to loading, we can get rid of this .state. Now if we give that a save, we can refresh this. We see our loading, and now we see our list. So that's a pretty quick example. Again, mentioning some of the things that you should be talking about is the differences between this .state and your hooks versions of state, how use effect can serve as kind of a combination between your different lifecycle methods. And then a lot of times you'll be asked about, like, what are some of the advantages or drawbacks, or should people even use classes anymore, things like that. So some things that I like to talk about. One, it makes the code for a lot of people a bit cleaner, less verbose. So you no longer have the this.set state and the big objects. If we had some sort of like updater or cleanup or anything like that, everything could be handled in our use effect as opposed to writing separate lifecycle methods for did mount, did update, etc. And then in addition to that, just kind of a preference thing, but for me, I think it's a little bit easier to read as well, and it's easier to kind of like break things out individually. So I see this set launches, and that's a lot more, I guess, clear to me. It might be different for you, but that's another thing. So consolidating your code, easier to read, easier to write, easier to understand. And again, with this is something that comes up on the job as well. So a lot of times you'll be, maybe updating code base and need to incrementally update your class-based components into hooks components. So even if this doesn't come up in an interview, it's important to understand some of the nuances and differences between class-based components and functional components so that you can make these updates accordingly. So that's it. This video is pretty quick. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. As I mentioned, I'll have the link to the repo for the before, and then there'll be a branch called hooks where you can see the finished version of this and compare as well. And then a link to this API. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.